We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim. We started reading Siman Nun Chet, which is the beginning of the halachot of Kriyat Shema, starting with the Zman of Kriyat Shema that the Gemara comes out in Masechet Brachot Daf Tet Amud Bet. The Zman Kriyat Shema shel Shacharit mi sheyireh et chavero haragil limo ketzat berichuk 400. The time starts from what we call the Zman of Misha Yakir et Chavero. Enough light in the sky, natural light, without any additional light pollution, so to speak, that we may have. You could recognize somebody that you know, but you're not close with, from the distance of 4 amot, which is about six feet. Mishna Berurah writes, it's not just Shema. I mean, in other words, you can't say, well, I'm going to say up to Shema and wait for this time and then say Shema. The brachot of Kriyat Shema also are part and parcel of Shema itself, and the time starts from Misha Yakir. And this that we say, it has to be a friend that you know a little bit. It's like someone that comes sometimes once in a while. You see them, so you know them, you know of them, but it's not your close friend, because a close friend you would know even much farther from their body type, the way they walk and carry themselves and so on. You would get to know them even from farther, and someone that you don't know at all, of course, even closer up, you would not recognize. So it has to be someone that you somewhat are familiar with, but not close friend. Now, the Mishna Berurah writes, "V'nikva hazman lekriyat Shema af miktzat anashim kamim mimitatam misha'ala amud hashachar." Even though that some people get up already earlier, misha'ala amud hashachar, from alot hashachar and on, this time is more considered as the time, the proper time of Shema, even though it says b'shochvecha v'kumecha, the time that people get up, the time that people go to sleep, and Amud HaShachar already some people are up. He called uvkumecha mina Torah, from already time of Alot HaShachar. נקבע זמן זה לקריאת שמע אף מקצת האנשים קמים ממיטתם עמוד השחר וקראינם ובקומך מן התורה, ולכן בדיעבד יצא לקמה בסעיף ד'. In other words, Mishna Berurah says, b'di'evad, if you read it from earlier on, from Alot HaShachar and on, b'di'evad you're yotze, because some people are up from Amud HaShachar, and therefore we could call it uvkumecha, the time that people wake up, but most people don't wake up by Amud HaShachar. Therefore, we wait for Misha Yakir. Enough light that you can recognize your friend. That's the time that more people are up, and it's considered uvkumecha. The majority of people are not up by this until this time of Misha Yakir. Therefore, l'chatchila, you should not read it until it hits this time of Misha Yakir. Also because Chazal have included the parasha of Tzitzit in Kriyat Shema, and in parasha of Tzitzit it says Uritem Oto, and you have to be able to see the differentiation between Techelet and Lavan. Techelet, the Karti, the Gemara that we have learned already, that you should be able to see the time that you could already determine which one is Techelet, which one is not, as we have learned in the Gemara. Therefore, Chazal set it up as a time that the person in natural light could say the difference between Techelet and Lavan. Now, the reason the Chazal have set this time that most people have to be awake, the Ben Ish Chai writes, this is because of a Geder, it's a Harchaka, that Chazal wanted us not to read it earlier than Amud HaShachar, just like you have the beginning of Gemara Masechet Brachot, that many mitzvot is up to Alot HaShachar, those things that are at night, but Chazal wanted to make sure you don't miss them, so they said Chatzot. Here is a similar thing that, when it's up and dark already, so you don't know if it's Alot HaShachar, not Alot HaShachar. You may think it's Alot HaShachar and do it earlier than Alot HaShachar, and then you miss a mitzvah d'oraita. So Chazal said, you know what? You have to have enough light in the sky that you could tell your friend apart in distance of 4 amot, and then you for sure have enough light that has been Alot HaShachar. That's what Ben Ish Chai writes, the reason for this time of Mashiach. So it says the Mishna Berurah, until the end of 3 hours, which is a fourth of the day, a quarter of the day, Nimshach Zmana Sof Shalosh Sha'ot Shehu Revi'ah Hayom, Maran writes. So Chafetz Chaim explains, Lechatchila asur leit'acher ad oto hazman. Lechatchila, it's asur to wait until the last time for Kriyat Shema. This is Shenot Eliyahu in the name of Yerushalmi says this, and the reason being because it's a mitzvah abab le'adachal ta'achrena. We're worried that you're going to miss it. And this happens a lot on Shabbatot. You wake up early in the morning on Shabbat and you say, okay, I'm going to say Shema before Shacharit. Especially in this season, that by the time you come to Shul already, the minyan is not going to say Shema on time, at least if you follow the Magen Avraham, which you should. And before you know it, you forget. When you come to Shul, it's already too late. Well, if a person says it right away, when you remember, that's the proper way to go. Shalosh Shaot sheken derech bnei melachim la'amod az. Why 3 hours? Because the latest people who wake up is 3 hours. The bnei melachim, at least in normal times, it used to be that people woke up early. So 3 hours was already the maximum that the royalty people would get up late. That would be the 3rd hour of the day, which is still considered uvkumecha. So now the latest time of Shema, let's say now it would be 8:50. That's the 3rd hour of the day, or 9:26. That would be the 3rd hour of the day. People usually everyone is up by that time already, and therefore up until that time is called uvkumecha. Past that time already is not called uvkumecha. Says the Mishna Berurah, umonin elu ashalosh shaot mizmad amud hashachar. These times we count them from amud hashachar. Magen Avraham writes, and the Gra writes it's from Netzach Hama. So now you know the difference between the major difference between Magen Avraham and the Gra. Now, Magen Avraham starts the day from Alot HaShachar, but he also ends it in Tzedek Kochavim, versus counting from Netzach Hama. You're starting much later. You also end earlier by Shkia. So you would think that, well, the days, the hours are longer according to Magen Avraham. So Sha'ot Zmaniyot should be a longer time according to Magen Avraham. Correct, that's correct. It makes a few minutes of difference. That the 3 hours are longer hours, but nevertheless, you're starting a whole full hour earlier, usually, starting from Alot HaShachar instead of Netz. So therefore, the time of Magen Avraham, even including the fact that the hours are much longer, still would be a good chunk of time prior to the Gra. So now, today, the difference between them would be about 36 minutes. So it's not a full hour, but it makes the difference. It's 8:50 versus 9:26. That will be the difference between them. So Magen Avraham starts the day earlier, and therefore usually the time of Kriyat Shema, Sof Zman Kriyat Shema, according to Magen Avraham, is much earlier than that of the Vilna Gaon. The Ben Ish Chai writes the halacha is like Magen Avraham, the Ikar of halacha. like the poskim who paskin like the Magen Abraham, that we count from Alot Shachar, not from Netzach Hama, and that's the Hora'ah, the Psak that has been accepted every verse, as the Ben Ish Chai and Kaf HaChaim or Letzion, all of them paskin the same thing, like the Magen Abraham, that we count the 3 hours from Alot Shachar. Now, sorry, many Ashkenazim, it's certainly the Talmidei Agra, but again, Chacham Obadia writes that Mikar Adin halacha is like the Gra. That's what Chacham Obadia writes. But lechatchila, it says yesh la'achmir b'davar. You should be machmir lechatchila. Now, this doesn't change those places that the minhag has been like the Magen Avraham. If you have had a minhag clearly like the Magen Avraham, then even though that's machloket and Chacham Obadia paskins the Meikar Adin halacha is like the Gra, still they would be bound to their minhag to be more stringent, like the Shita of those poskim who follow the Magen Avraham. Therefore, Chacham Obadia says, if you have a Talmid Chacham that is working very hard to learn late at night, he could wake up a little bit later, says Chacham Obadia, and even though that he's going to miss the Zman Kriyat Shema of Magen Avraham, so long as he catches the Gra, the learning that he does at night is kedai to push over the Ziman of Magen Avraham, and therefore he says again that's one of the nafkaminas that Chacham Obadia brings to be lenient. But if you have a tzibur, if you have a whole community that they daven late on Shabbat morning, then they should, daven the Shema earlier on a little bit. The Kriyat Shema Kedat HaMekilim, Rashai La'amshich B'minago sheyesh lahem al ma shesmoch. He also says Chacham Obadia that you could try to read it earlier, but you could rely on the minhag of the tzibur that you have if the minhag is to be lenient like the Gra. So it comes out like a very interesting machloket. On one hand, the Ben Ish Chai says the minhag and the halacha is like Magen Avraham. So says also Or Letzion. So says the Kaf HaChaim. Chacham Obadia says Meikar Adin, it could be lenient. So push comes to shove, a person that is using their time at night well to learn until well past midnight, and then in the morning, especially in the winter time, the time is earlier and they may miss Zman Kriyat Shema, they could rely on the Gaon for the later Zman Kriyat Shema, even if they can miss Magen Avraham. Okay. Mm-hmm. No, you say it for sure. For sure, you should say it. Yeah, for sure. Of course. Because again, Mikar Adin Arvadia says halacha is like the Gra. So you certainly should say it right away. The earlier the better. Also, one point, once you ask this question, you have many times, even how you calculate the Amud Shachar and the Gra and the Magen Avraham are not so simple. They're different without getting into too much complexity and details of how the cheshbon, how the calculation of these hours work. There are different ways to calculate them, and therefore, the earlier you say it, the better. For instance, according to the Ben Ish Chai, is one cheshbon which is a little bit different than the way we have it in the calendar. It comes out a bunch of minutes earlier. So even when you are careful with Magen Avraham, and the calendar says, for instance, 8:50, perhaps if you could do it a little bit earlier, don't wait until the last minute, because there are those who calculated it slightly differently and end up with a few minutes off. And of course, on top of all of that, we have mentioned that the times could be off based on what the time or the calendar says, which is sea level and so on. And in Los Angeles, you have one of the largest cities, and the entire block of land is considered the same hour zone, which is a set international hour, but it's not really correct because it can be a few minutes off depending on where on earth you are on that large piece of land. the beginning and the end of those 15 degrees on Earth, in the 360, is one hour apart from each other. And therefore, you have to be, sometimes it could be up to a half an hour off from where the actual time should be, and so on. So therefore, the earlier a person could say Shema, of course, the better it would be. When Maran says until the end of third hour, which is a quarter of the day, there's no difference. We don't go with 60-minute hours here. We go with a fourth of the day. Huzman Kriyat Shema. The Olam Chelek Revia Mayom, 1/4 of the day is Zman Kriyat Shema. Now you have a 14-hour day, so a fourth of that will be what? 3.5. If you have a 10-hour day, it will be 2.5. So both of that 2.5 hours, which means 2.5 60-minute hours, right? 158 minutes versus 3.5, which would be 210 minutes, would be the same fourth of the day. So your hours consists 3 hours. Both of them are called 3 hours. Just your hours are 50-minute hours versus 70-minute hours in those two examples that we gave, right? So it's what we call Sha'ot Zmaniot, which is not a 60-minute hour. It depends on the length of the day. Day is always 12 hours. So sometimes you have the actual minute days, 12 hours. Sometimes you have 10 hours, sometimes you have 14 hours, depending on winter and summer. But in halakha, it's always 12 hours. So you divide that, and if your day is 10 hours, 12 divided by 12, so then your hours will be 50-minute hours, Sha'ot Zmaniot. And if your day is 14 hours, then you'll have a 70-minute hour, Sha'ot Zmaniot, right? Which would make all the difference for Kriyat Shema, because 3 hours would be 150 minutes versus 210 minutes, right? And in equinoxes would be 180 minutes. So that is the difference. But you always go after fourth of the day. Therefore, in winter time, you have to be careful. Lemaher likro Kriyat Shema. You want to do it quickly because even though that your day is starting much later, but your minutes are much shorter. So your 3 hours are 30 minutes shorter than equinoxes. So even though that you're getting a head start by starting the day much later, but your 3 hours are much shorter, so you end up with a earlier time for Sof Zman Kriyat Shema than you would have in a regular day. Okay. He says, well, in the time of summertime, you have to be even more careful. Because people nowadays, since the Chafetz Chaim, they wake up the same time during the course of the year. So they're not waking up at 5 or 4:30 just because it's light during the summer. They wake up the same 6, 7 o'clock in the morning that they usually do, right? Especially nowadays that they have control over lights and smart homes and so on and so forth. You more regulate yourself because you're not bound to the outside light. You have your own light. We ask if you wake up at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, in summer, the day started already at 4:35. So your 3 hours is almost done by the time you wake up. The earlier the day is, the longer the day is, means the earlier you're starting your day, and therefore you're losing those minutes from earlier on in the morning. You have to finish the whole thing. If you delay your time of Shema because of tzitzit and tefillin, you are making a mistake. And I should say it right away. Say it on time without even tzitzit and tefillin. And when you will have it, you'll put and say it again. But why should you wait until you get tzitzit and do a Kriyat Shema, which is b'di'evet? So again, as we mentioned before, the best time of it is right before Netzach Hama. Today, for instance, Netzach Hama would be very late. Actually, it's 6:58. So you'll have a time to say it beforehand. Again, if you start today, we said actually Shema right by Netzach Hama, right? Especially if you have the 2.5 minutes that we mentioned, which would be 7:01 basically. So that's actually pretty good for saying that tefillah that you have ends up being by Netzach Hama. But even if it's earlier, get up in the morning, say your Shema by Netzach Hama, and then daven tefillah whenever you daven later on, as Rabbi Yashiv says in that Shuvah in Kos Shuvot, Chelek Aleph Siman Tetvav, that you say the Shema with Netzach Hama. That's already, because that's the main part of davening with Netz, is saying Shema before Netz, and that is something that most people could do if they are up at that time. Even if you have a safek, maybe the time of Shema is going to pass. You should not wait until talit and tefillin, just say it right away. Because one does not stop the other one. This happens a lot also when you're traveling, you're in the plane, you're not comfortable to daven in the plane, whatever else, maybe you're waiting for the stewardess to come serve the water, and you want to go in the back and daven standing and put on tefillin, and so on. So sometimes you're just waiting and the time is passing, especially if you are traveling east, then the time is passing much quicker, because you have the regular passage of time, and also you're traveling east. It changes, yeah. It's based on where you are right now. Really, it's based on where you are in that place on the ground level. When you're 35,000 feet above the sea level, which is usually where the planes fly, you're 20 minutes ahead of the time. On the bottom. In other words, if you see the sun setting from the plane, that means already it has been sunset 20 minutes ago down there on the floor where your plane is.
So what's the shortest time to start day in Los Angeles? You start going. What's the amount of time you have to say tomorrow?
Say it as soon as possible. Again, you could make the cheshbon based on the speed of the plane and what time it is and what season it is, and where on Earth you are. So Los Angeles is pretty central, but if you're higher up, it will go faster actually, depending on which direction you're flying and what season it is. So again, all those are factors, but I'm just saying you want to say it as soon as possible and not wait for the flight attendants to come and you go in the back. And these are cheshbonot that people make. When you're in plane, you don't want to put on tefillin in your seat. First of all, you're gonna think you're a terrorist and you're gonna blow yourself up. And secondly, it's just pretty uncomfortable. So best would be to go in the back, where the flight attendants are not there because they're tending the drinks for the passengers, and you could put on your tefillin, stand up, down quickly, and come back. So people wait for that. But if you're waiting and you're gonna lose Zman Kriyat Shema, it's not kedai. Say Shema now, and then you'll say it later on afterwards. The enomakev zeh, aval belav achi yamtin. The kola korek Kriyat Shema belot tefillin. If you have time and you know for sure you're going to have time in 2 minutes, then wait to say it with tefillin, because of course, as the Gemara says, if you say Shema without tefillin, is me'id keilu me'id edut sheker ba'atzmo, and therefore you should wait and say it properly. But Mishna Berurah says that those people who delay the time of Shema because of tefillah b'tzibur, because they know they're going to go daven b'tzibur. Their minyan on Shabbat morning davens at 9 o'clock. And 9 o'clock is already past today would be past Zman Kriyat Shema Magen Abraham. That's also not proper. At least you have to be careful to say Shema prior to the time that you start Tefillah B'tzibur, and have kavanah that you yotze with this Shema that you're saying earlier on, as we already discussed this actually in Siman Memvav. We already had the Mishna Berurah discussed this before, and that is the right conduct. Now, ואין לאחר הקריאה לבית הכנסת בשביל הזקנים המאחרים לבוא ויסתרחו להתפלל ביחידי, כיוון שעל ידי זה יעבור זמן קריאת שמע, ואין אומרים לו לאדם חטא בשביל שיסגד חבריך. You have to set it up in a way that you don't miss זמן קריאת שמע, ובשבת ביום טוב מצוי מאוד לעבור זמן קריאת שמע מפני כמה דברים. It's very much prevalent that in shuls, especially in seasons that Kriyat Shema's time is earlier, people would miss Zman Kriyat Shema. Al ken hachacham enav b'rosho. When you have communities like that the norm is to daven like that, chacham enav b'rosho, you should have a earlier Kriyat Shema announcement, whatever it is that you say, or have an earlier minyan, or al kol panim לקרוא Kriyat Shema b'zmana, קודם שיעמוד להתפלל עם הציבור, or individually say it earlier on before you start davening, as we mentioned before in Siman Memvav, and that would be the proper conduct. Bezat Hashem will continue this in days to come.